The laughter stopped so abruptly that for a moment, the only sound in Studio 6B was the quiet hum of the cameras. Jimmy Fallon, mid-joke about celebrity fashion fails, found himself staring at the woman sitting across from him with an expression that had shifted from comedian to something much deeper. What had started as a lighthearted segment about retirement hobbies was about to become a masterclass in what real heroism looks like. It was a Tuesday evening at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, and the energy in the Tonight Show studio was typically electric. The Roots had just finished an incredible opening number. Jimmy had delivered his monologue with perfect timing, and the audience was buzzing with that special excitement that comes from being part of America's favorite late-night tradition. Tonight's guest lineup was refreshingly diverse. A pop star promoting her new album, a chef demonstrating impossible food combinations, and Eleanor Martinez, a 67-year-old retired elementary school teacher from San Antonio, Texas, who had written to the show about her unique post-retirement project of cataloging 40 years of student memories. Eleanor wasn't the typical Tonight Show guest. She wore a simple lavender blouse that she'd clearly chosen with care, a modest silver necklace that caught the studio lights, and comfortable shoes that spoke of decades spent on her feet in classrooms. Her gray hair was styled in a neat bob, and her hands showed the gentle wear of someone who had spent a lifetime writing on blackboards and grading papers by lamplight. During the pre-interview, Eleanor had charmed the producers with stories from her 4 decades of teaching. She spoke about the evolution of education, the joy of watching children discover their potential, and her current project of creating memory books for former students who had reached out to reconnect with their favorite teacher. What she hadn't mentioned, what she had carefully kept to herself, was the real reason she had reached out to The Tonight Show. Jimmy settled into his chair with that trademark warmth that made guests feel like they were chatting with an old friend rather than performing for millions of viewers. The cameras rolled smoothly, the audience was engaged, and everything was proceeding exactly as planned. "So, Eleanor," Jimmy began, his voice carrying that perfect blend of respect and curiosity. 40 years of teaching elementary school. That's incredible. You must have taught thousands of kids over the years. Eleanor's eyes lit up with the kind of joy that comes from talking about something you've devoted your life to. Actually, Jimmy, I calculated it once. Over my career, I taught 2,847 students. I know that sounds obsessive, but I kept track because each one of them mattered to me. That's amazing! And now you're retired, working on this memory project. Tell us about that. Jimmy leaned forward, genuinely interested. Well, Eleanor smiled, it started when former students began reaching out on social media. They wanted to share what they were doing now, thank me for something I taught them, or just reconnect. So I decided to create individual memory books for anyone who wanted one, filled with photos, report cards, artwork they'd created in my class. The audience responded with warm appreciation. Jimmy's face showed that childlike wonder that made him such a compelling host. That's so thoughtful. It must be incredible to see what your students have accomplished. As Eleanor began sharing stories about her former students, doctors, teachers, artists, parents, something subtle shifted in her demeanor. Her smile remained bright, but Jimmy, always attuned to the emotional undercurrents of his conversations, noticed her hands clasping together more tightly. "Eleanor," Jimmy said gently, "this project must be pretty expensive, getting all these books printed and shipped. How are you managing that on a teacher's pension?" For just a moment, Eleanor's composure flickered. She looked down at her hands, then back up at Jimmy with eyes that suddenly seemed to carry a weight she'd been carefully concealing. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about, Jimmy. There's something I need to share, something I probably should have mentioned before, but I wasn't sure if it was appropriate for your show." The studio began to quiet. The Roots, sensing the shift in energy, let their background music fade. Even the audience seemed to instinctively lean forward. "What is it, Eleanor?" Jimmy asked, his voice stripped of all performance, genuine concern replacing entertainment. "What is it, Eleanor?" Jimmy asked, his voice stripped of all performance, genuine concern replacing entertainment. Eleanor took a deep breath. The kind people take when they're about to share something that matters more than anything else in the world. Jimmy, I didn't just teach for 40 years. Over those 4 decades, I saved money. Every month, from my very first paycheck to my last, I put aside whatever I could. Sometimes it was $50, sometimes it was $10. During the lean years, it might have been just $5 a month. Jimmy remained silent, sensing that Eleanor needed space to tell her story. I never married, never had children of my own. My students were my children. So while other people were saving for vacations or new cars or bigger houses, I was saving for something else. For them. Eleanor's voice grew stronger with each word, as if speaking this truth was giving her power. Last month, when I officially retired, I had $387,000 in my savings account. 40 years of putting aside every extra dollar I could find. And you know what I did with it, Jimmy? The studio was completely silent now. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. I gave it all away. Every penny. I divided it among my former students who needed help with college tuition, medical bills, starting businesses, buying their first homes. I kept track of who needed what, and I found a way to help. Jimmy's mouth fell open slightly. The audience gasped audibly. This wasn't just generosity. This was a level of sacrifice that transcended ordinary understanding. Eleanor, Jimmy said, his voice catching slightly, you gave away your entire life savings? Everything you'd worked for? Eleanor nodded, her eyes beginning to shine with unshed tears. But that's not all, Jimmy. That's not why I'm really here. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers and photographs. These are letters, Jimmy, letters from the students I helped. And what they're telling me, what they're showing me, it's changing my perspective on everything I thought I knew about education, about impact, about what it means to be a teacher. Eleanor opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. This is Maria Santos. I taught her in 3rd grade, 1987. She was brilliant, but came from a family that couldn't afford college. With the money I gave her, she finished medical school last month. But look at this letter she sent me. Eleanor began to read, her voice growing stronger. Mrs. Martinez, because of your gift, I'm not just becoming a doctor. I'm opening a free clinic in our old neighborhood. You didn't just change my life, you changed the lives of every person I'll ever help. Your classroom lessons about kindness and persistence saved more lives than you'll ever know. Jimmy was leaning forward now, completely absorbed in Eleanor's story. And this, Eleanor continued, pulling out another letter, is from David Chen. I taught him in 1995. He used the money to start a nonprofit that provides school supplies for low-income families. He writes, Mrs. Martinez, remember when you used to buy supplies with your own money for kids who couldn't afford them? Now I'm doing that for thousands of children because you taught me that education is the greatest gift you can give. Eleanor's voice broke slightly. But it's this one that really got to me, Jimmy. She pulled out a handwritten note, clearly from a child. This is from Isabella Rodriguez. I taught her grandmother 30 years ago, her mother 20 years ago, and Isabella last year before I retired. She's 8 years old, and she writes, Dear Mrs. Martinez, Mama says you helped our family go to college. She says you're an angel. I want to be a teacher just like you so I can help kids too. Can you teach me how to save money to help people? Love, Isabella. Tears were openly flowing down Eleanor's face now, and Jimmy felt his own throat tightening with emotion. Jimmy, Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper, I thought I was giving away my retirement security. I thought I was making a foolish financial decision. But what I've learned is that I wasn't giving away my savings. I was planting seeds, seeds that are growing into forests. That's when Jimmy Fallon did something unprecedented in his career as a late-night host. He stood up, walked around his desk, and without a word, pulled Eleanor into a hug that lasted long enough for the cameras to capture not just a moment, but a movement. "Eleanor," Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just teach 2,847 students. You created a legacy that's going to impact thousands, maybe millions of lives. You turned your classroom into a launching pad for human potential." Jimmy released the hug, but kept his hands on Eleanor's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "But more than that," he continued, "you've just taught everyone watching this show what real wealth looks like. It's not what you accumulate, it's what you give away. It's not what you keep, it's what you invest in other people's dreams." The audience began to applaud, but Jimmy held up his hand. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What are you living on now? How are you taking care of yourself?" Eleanor smiled through her tears. "I have my pension, Jimmy. It's not much, but it's enough. I've lived simply my whole life. I don't need luxury, I need purpose. And helping my students, seeing what they're accomplishing, that's worth more than any amount of money in the bank." Jimmy walked back to his desk, but instead of sitting down, he picked up his phone. "Eleanor, you said you're working on this memory book project, sending them to former students at your own expense?" "Yes, but it's fine, Jimmy. I can manage." "No," Jimmy interrupted gently but firmly. "No, it's not fine. It's not fine that someone who has given everything should have to worry about the cost of giving more." Jimmy looked directly into the camera. "Folks, I've been doing this show for years, and I've met incredible people, but Eleanor Martinez just redefined what it means to be a hero. She spent 40 years teaching children and 40 years saving money, not for herself, but for them. She turned her entire life into a scholarship fund powered by love." He turned back to Eleanor. "Eleanor, The Tonight Show wants to partner with you. We're going to fund your memory book project. Every book, every photo, every piece of postage. But more than that, we're going to help you tell your story, because the world needs to know that people like you exist." The studio erupted in applause, but Jimmy wasn't finished. "And because you taught us that the greatest investment is investing in education, The Tonight Show is establishing the Eleanor Martinez Teaching Excellence Fund. We're starting with $100,000, and we're asking viewers to help us grow it. Because if a teacher on a modest salary can save $387,000 to help her students, imagine what we can do together." Eleanor was sobbing now, but they were tears of overwhelming joy mixed with disbelief. "Jimmy, I don't know what to say." "I never expected." "Eleanor," Jimmy said softly, "you've spent 40 years saying everything that needed to be said. You said it with your actions, with your sacrifice, with your love. Tonight, we're just making sure the world hears you." Jimmy walked back to Eleanor and did something that no one in the studio expected. He began to remove his suit jacket. "This jacket," Jimmy said, "has been with me through every Tonight Show episode. It's been part of celebrations, interviews, moments of joy and surprise. But tonight, it represents something bigger." He gently draped the jacket around Eleanor's shoulders. "Eleanor, I want you to keep this as a symbol of something important. You've shown us that the real uniform of heroism isn't a cape or a costume. It's the simple clothing of a teacher who shows up every day, who believes in every child, who sacrifices quietly and loves loudly." Eleanor looked down at the jacket, then back up at Jimmy, completely overwhelmed. "But more than that," Jimmy continued, "I want everyone watching to understand something. Eleanor didn't just teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. She taught something much more valuable. She taught 2,847 students that they mattered enough for someone to sacrifice for them. She taught them that dreams are worth investing in. She taught them that love multiplies when you give it away." Jimmy's voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. "Eleanor, when Isabella Rodriguez grows up to become a teacher, and when she starts saving money to help her students, she'll be carrying forward something you started. When Maria Santos opens that free clinic, she'll be practicing medicine with lessons you taught her about caring for others. When David Chan provides school supplies for children who can't afford them, he'll be continuing work you started decades ago. The applause was thunderous now, but it was different from typical late-night television applause. It was the sound of 300 people recognizing something sacred, something that reminded them why teachers matter, why sacrifice matters, why love matters. But Jimmy still wasn't finished. He walked back to his desk and picked up a marker. On a large piece of paper, he wrote, "Teachers change the world one student at a time. Eleanor Martinez." "Eleanor," he said, "I want you to sign this. Not for me, not for the show, but for every teacher watching tonight who needs to be reminded that their work matters, that their sacrifice is seen, that their love is changing the world in ways they might never fully know." Eleanor stood on slightly shaky legs, walked to the desk, and signed her name with the careful penmanship of someone who had spent decades teaching children to write. As she finished signing, something beautiful happened. The audience began to chant, "Thank you, Eleanor! Thank you, Eleanor!" But then one voice called out, "Thank you to all teachers!" And suddenly, the entire studio was on its feet, applauding not just for Eleanor, but for every teacher who had ever stayed late to help a struggling student, who had spent their own money on classroom supplies, who had believed in children when no one else did. Eleanor stood in the center of it all, wearing Jimmy's jacket, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by the kind of love that teachers spend their entire careers giving but rarely receiving in return. As the show moved to commercial break, Jimmy did one more thing that the cameras didn't capture. He wrote his personal phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to Eleanor. "I want to stay in touch," he said quietly. "I want to help you connect with more former students. I want to make sure your story keeps inspiring people. But mostly, I want to learn from you. I want to understand how someone develops that kind of love, that kind of generosity." Eleanor tucked the paper into her purse next to the folder of letters from her students. "Jimmy," she said, "it's not complicated. You just remember that every person you meet is someone's child, someone's hope, someone's future. And if you can help that future be a little brighter, well, that's what we're here for." The episode aired 1 week later and immediately broke viewing records. But more importantly, it sparked something that continued long after the camera stopped rolling. The Eleanor Martinez Teaching Excellence Fund grew to over $2 million within a month, funded by viewers who had been moved by her story. Teachers across the country began sharing their own stories of sacrifice and dedication. Students reached out to thank teachers who had impacted their lives. Families started conversations about the educators who had shaped their children. Eleanor returned to San Antonio wearing Jimmy's jacket and carrying enough funding to create memory books for every former student who wanted one. But she found something waiting for her that was even more valuable than money: a line of former students outside her apartment building, each carrying their own letters of gratitude, their own stories of how her lessons had shaped their lives. 6 months later, Eleanor received a package from Jimmy. Inside was a new jacket, perfectly tailored to fit her, with a note that read, "Eleanor, this one's yours to keep, but more importantly, it's yours to pass on to another teacher who needs to remember that their work matters. Thank you for teaching all of us what real heroism looks like, Jimmy." But the most meaningful response came from 8-year-old Isabella Rodriguez, who sent Eleanor a small envelope containing $5 bills and a note. "Dear Mrs. Martinez, I saved this from my allowance. Can you help me start helping kids too? I want to be like you when I grow up. Love, Isabella." Eleanor framed that note and hung it next to her teaching certificate because it represented something more valuable than any award or recognition. Proof that the cycle of caring, the commitment to service, the understanding that we are here to lift each other up was continuing into the next generation. The Tonight Show continues to feature celebrity interviews and comedy sketches, but Jimmy approaches each episode differently now. He looks for the Eleanor Martinezes of the world, the quiet heroes whose stories need to be told, whose sacrifices need to be honored, whose love needs to be amplified. Because Eleanor taught him that the most powerful stories aren't about fame or fortune. They're about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about love that multiplies when it's shared, about the truth that the greatest wealth comes not from what we accumulate, but from what we give away. The jacket continues to hang in Eleanor's closet, a reminder of the night when her quiet sacrifice was recognized by the world. But more importantly, it's a symbol of something larger, the understanding that teachers don't just educate minds, they shape hearts, they nurture dreams, they invest in futures with a generosity that echoes across generations. And in classrooms across America, teachers who watched Eleanor's story continue their work with renewed purpose, knowing that someone sees their sacrifice, someone understands their calling, someone believes that what they do every day is changing the world one student at a time. Because that's what Eleanor Martinez proved on a Tuesday night in Studio 6B, that heroes don't wear capes, they wear simple clothes and carry lesson plans. They don't seek recognition, they seek opportunities to serve. And they don't measure their wealth in dollars. They measure it in lives changed, dreams realized, and love multiplied across time. The legacy continues, one student at a time, one teacher at a time, one act of generosity at a time. Because Eleanor Martinez taught us all that the greatest lesson isn't found in any textbook. It's found in the simple truth that when we give everything we have to help others succeed, we discover that we haven't lost anything at all. We've gained everything that truly matters. 3 months after the episode aired, Jimmy received a phone call that would forever change how he understood the ripple effects of that Tuesday night. Dr. Lisa Thompson, the superintendent of the San Antonio Independent School District, was calling with news that seemed almost too remarkable to believe. "Jimmy," Dr. Thompson said, her voice filled with excitement, "I need to tell you what's happened since Eleanor's story aired. We've had over 300 teachers reach out to us wanting to transfer to our district. But that's not the most incredible part." Jimmy listened intently as Dr. Thompson continued. "We've had 57 people apply to become teachers who had never considered education before. They specifically cited Eleanor's story as their inspiration. A former investment banker, a retired military officer, a successful engineer, all of them said that watching Eleanor made them realize they wanted to spend their lives making the kind of impact she made." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Dr. Thompson sharing story after story of how Eleanor's example had transformed not just individual lives, but entire educational communities. School districts across the country were reporting similar phenomena: a renewed interest in teaching as a profession, increased community support for educators, and most importantly, teachers who had been considering leaving the profession reconsidering their decisions. But perhaps the most moving update came from Eleanor herself when she called Jimmy 2 weeks later. "Jimmy," Eleanor said, her voice bright with joy, "I need to share something wonderful with you. Do you remember Isabella Rodriguez, the 8-year-old who wanted to learn how to save money to help other children?" "Of course," Jimmy replied. "How could I forget her?" "Well, her story has inspired something beautiful. Children across the country have started what they're calling Isabella Clubs, groups of kids who save their allowances and birthday money to help other children in need. It's not about the amounts, Jimmy. Some of these children are saving quarters and dimes. But it's about the spirit of giving, the understanding that even young people can make a difference." Eleanor's voice grew softer, more reflective. "Last week, I received a package from a school in Maine. Inside were 127 envelopes, each containing $1 or $2, along with handwritten notes from children explaining why they wanted to help other kids go to college. One little boy wrote, 'My teacher told me about Mrs. Eleanor and I want to be a helper too.' The conversation continued with Eleanor sharing more stories of the unexpected ways her story had spread. A group of retired teachers in Phoenix had started a mentorship program for new educators. A business owner in Chicago had begun providing free school supplies to underfunded classrooms, inspired by Eleanor's example of quiet generosity. College students studying education were creating care packages for teachers in struggling districts. "But Jimmy," Eleanor said, "the most meaningful response has been from my former students. Not just the ones I helped financially, but students from decades ago who are now sharing their own stories of how something I taught them changed their trajectory. I'm learning that impact works in ways we never imagined." She paused, and Jimmy could hear the emotion in her voice. "Maria Santos, the doctor I helped through medical school? She called me yesterday to tell me that she's named her free clinic the Eleanor Martinez Community Health Center. She said every patient who walks through those doors will be treated with the same care and attention I showed when I believed in her potential." Jimmy felt his own eyes welling up with tears. "Eleanor, do you understand what you've created? This isn't just about the money you gave away. You've started a movement." "I think Margaret Mead said it best," Eleanor replied. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Except I'd add that sometimes it just takes one person willing to believe in the power of education and love." 6 months later, Jimmy did something unprecedented for The Tonight Show. He dedicated an entire episode to following up on Eleanor's story, bringing together some of the students she had helped and some of the teachers who had been inspired by her example. The episode, titled The Eleanor Effect, featured Maria Santos via video call from her clinic, David Chan from his nonprofit headquarters, and most powerfully, a panel of 5 new teachers who had changed careers after watching Eleanor's original appearance. "I was a corporate lawyer making 6 figures," said Jennifer Walsh, now a second-grade teacher in Detroit. "I watched Eleanor's story and realized I was spending my days helping rich people get richer, while she had spent 40 years helping children become their best selves. I gave up my law practice and went back to school to become a teacher. Best decision I ever made." The show also featured a video montage sent in by viewers from around the world showing the various Eleanor projects that had sprung up in communities everywhere. Schools had started teacher appreciation investment funds, where parents and community members contributed to help teachers who used their own money for classroom supplies. Businesses had begun Adopt a Classroom programs. Students had organized Thank a Teacher campaigns. But the most touching moment came when 10-year-old Isabella Rodriguez, now 2 years older and even more determined, appeared on the show with a presentation board showing how her Isabella clubs had spread to over 200 schools across 35 states. "Mrs. Eleanor taught us that you don't have to be rich to help people," Isabella explained to Jimmy with the serious demeanor of a child who understood something profound about the world. "You just have to care and you have to try. Our clubs have saved $47,000 so far, and we're going to keep going until every kid who wants to go to college can go." Jimmy knelt down to Isabella's level, just as he had with Eleanor 2 years earlier. "Isabella, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Without hesitation, Isabella replied, "A teacher, just like Mrs. Eleanor, and I want to save money to help my students too." That's what teachers do. They help kids become their dreams. The episode ended with a surprise video message from Eleanor, who was unable to travel to New York due to health concerns, but wanted to share a final thought. "Jimmy," Eleanor said from her living room in San Antonio, surrounded by hundreds of thank you letters and photos from students, "when I gave away my savings, I thought I was ending one chapter of my life. I didn't realize I was beginning the most important chapter of all. I've learned that love and generosity aren't finite resources. The more you give away, the more you have. The more you invest in others, the richer your own life becomes." She held up a photo of herself with Jimmy wearing his jacket on that transformative Tuesday night. "This photo sits on my desk every day, not because it reminds me of being on television, but because it reminds me of the moment when my quiet story became a loud message of hope. You helped me understand that our individual acts of love can become collective movements of change. Eleanor's voice grew stronger, filled with the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime teaching important lessons. To every teacher watching, to every person who works with children, to everyone who has ever wondered if their daily efforts matter, they do. You are planting seeds that will grow into forests. You are lighting candles that will illuminate paths you'll never walk. You are investing in futures you may never see, but futures that exist because you believed in them. And to every student, every child, every young person who has been helped by a teacher's sacrifice, remember that the greatest way to honor that gift is to give it forward. Become the person your teacher believed you could be, and then help someone else become who they're meant to be. Eleanor smiled that radiant smile that had convinced Jimmy to give her his jacket 2 years earlier. Because that's what education really is. It's not just about learning facts or skills. It's about learning, to love growing, to love helping others grow. It's about understanding that we are all teachers and we are all students, and the classroom of life never closes. The episode became the highest-rated Tonight Show episode in 3 years, but more importantly, it solidified Eleanor Martinez as more than a viral sensation. She had become a symbol of the transformative power of quiet heroism, proof that the most profound changes often come not from grand gestures, but from daily acts of love repeated over decades. Today, the Eleanor Martinez Teaching Excellence Fund has distributed over $5 million to educators and students around the world. Isabella Rodriguez, now 12, continues to lead her Isabella clubs while maintaining perfect grades and planning her future career in education. Maria Santos' free clinic has served over 10,000 patients. David Chen's nonprofit has provided school supplies to 50,000 children. And Eleanor Martinez, now 69 and still living simply in San Antonio, continues to receive letters from former students, new teachers, and children inspired by her story. She keeps them all in boxes labeled by year, creating an archive of human connection that spans decades. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Eleanor's legacy is this. In 2024, the average teacher retention rate in the United States increased for the first time in 15 years. Education schools reported a 23% increase in enrollment. Teacher appreciation events became community-wide celebrations rather than simple gestures. Eleanor Martinez had done more than save money and give it away. She had reminded the world why teachers matter, why education matters, why believing in human potential is the most important investment any society can make. And every Tuesday night when The Tonight Show tapes, Jimmy Fallon looks out at his audience and remembers that among them might be sitting the next Eleanor Martinez, the next quiet hero whose story could change everything, the next teacher whose love could transform the world. Because Eleanor taught him the most important lesson of all. We are all capable of changing lives, of making a difference, of leaving the world better than we found it. We just have to care enough to try, love enough to sacrifice, and believe enough to keep going, one student at a time, one day at a time, one act of kindness at a time.